You still hear noise from my side?
Yeah.
Let me check.
Let me kill the fan on my side. Hello and welcome to Identerati Office Hours. This is Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue. Today is episode 124. I'm sorry for the informal start of 5 seconds where I didn't realize the camera was rolling. Our guest today is Gabriel Maynor, who just disappeared for a second. There he is. Hi, Gabriel.
Hello.
And so this episode is the first episode where we're gonna focus on audience feedback if we get any, and if we don't, we have a couple of pieces of recent news which we're going to discuss. I'm taking off the hat today because I'm not in interview mode. I'm in I guess answer questions mode. Anything Authz related. So we're going informal. And I'll start. Gabriel, you've already been on the show before, but maybe we'll just start by, can you just give a quick introduction of yourself for people who maybe didn't see the last episode?
Yeah, so my name is Gabriel Maynor. As Mike said, I'm now leading the developer relations and community in Permit.io, a startup around fine-grained authorization. Not much to say for people that are in the community. I've been in software development for 12 years now. 9 years from that was around access control, network access, authentication, authorization, accounting, and then fine-grained authorization. And yeah, happy to be with you as always, Mike, having a good chat about access control and authorization. I think you, even if we'll not get any kind of question from the audience, which I hope that we'll get, you brought some very nice topics that we can chat on them even for more than an hour.
Probably.
And if not, we can start chat about AI and then we can take it until midnight maybe.
So audience, this is your chance to ask us whatever you want. Oh wait, I already see questions. Oh, that's a comment more. And so
maybe a question will follow up.
Authz related. Obviously Glue does a lot of identity stuff, and this is an identity live stream. Maybe we can take some left field questions. We're trying to keep it Authz related. Apologies to the West Coast people. I know it's only 7 a.m. out there. So probably more East Coast and Europe oriented. But let's start the conversation with what I think is the biggest news of the week, that Axiomatics is acquired by a system integrator called Leonardo, European-based systems integrator. And Gabriel, do you have any thoughts on this, or my backup plan was to read what ChatGPT had to say about it? But before we do that, did you have any thoughts, Gabriel, on this acquisition?
I think the interesting part of it is, like, Leonardo is a company that not many of us know, and I actually didn't know about them before the acquisition. I know Axiomatics because of the IEM stuff, and I can think on multiple angles. So maybe give a short overview on Leonardo. It's kind of global corporate around the security / even like physical security. They made helicopters, or at least systems for helicopters or something like that. It's kind of a giant company, and it's interesting to see their take on authorization. Where do they take that? To put also some context on Axiomatics. Axiomatics is the company behind the ZACML and the Alpha language, two standards that set the stones, and with a good friend, with David Borsad, set the stones for the most common conceptions today about ABAC. They put the stones on the model of the PEP, PDP, PXP, PAP, whatever it is.
Yeah, all that stuff predates them, although ZACML formalized it. But I believe there was PDP, PEP patterns.
Yeah,
maybe
it's an old concept.
90s. Yeah. But
Axiomatics on computer science, but that was the first kind of fine-grained one that utilized them and put the sense on what each of them do. And Axiomatics were very formalized, at least from what it seems from the public perspective, in making super kind of workforce, IT internal authorization. And it's
Yeah,
interesting.
let
I
me
mean,
just break in and say a couple of words about Axiomatics history. I remember when the company started in the mid 2000s. I remember Jerry Gable, who was a Gartner analyst at the time, or Burton Group analyst, leaving and joining Axiomatics. That was a big sign that this was a big up and coming company. They were really the earliest company to focus exclusively on authorization, whereas previous IAM companies like SiteMinder in the 90s had done authorization and authentication. Axiomatics was like the first pure play authorization company. Um, and they did lead, at one time, Zachmo was seen to be potentially like the answer for authorization, policy expression. Although it fizzled, I think, with most things, XMLs, as the number of XML security vulnerabilities like exploded. I have this theory that half the CVEs on the internet are about XML. Unproven theory, but I just feel like that's true. So XML sort of, or XACML sort of goes by the wayside, but Axiomatics continues maybe to slowly grow, but not to achieve the kind of growth that a lot of tech companies might aspire to get to your $1 billion valuation. So it's sort of like maybe Glue hasn't either. But they're still making money and they're around and doing great work and thought leadership. Um, and so it's been, I don't know exactly how long, but we're probably looking at like 18 years or so that it's been around.
yeah,
And in those times, things change at companies. People want to retire, people want to move on. More capital is needed to expand the business, and stuff happens. Um, and so it's interesting to see what happens to Axiomatics as sort of this kind of company that's a solid tech company with growth, maybe not exponential growth, but growth nonetheless. And but then my question comes, like, who wants to buy this type of company? And then why Leonardo, more of a company that we would say is in industry rather than somebody who's out there selling technology authorization solutions to customers? And that's the part that I didn't quite, that took me a little by surprise.
I
So
think there I can think of two approaches to this kind of acquisition. One of them is similar to what we see with private equity of acquisition of public companies. We saw now the latest one. We just have a chat about it. Like private equity just acquire Couchbase, and they
yeah.
take it, they build the exponential motion, and then sell it. Maybe there is kind of corporate development in Leonardo that see the trend around fine-grained permissions and say, hey, this is the company that was the cornerstone for that. If there is a valid business trend here, we'll buy it and we'll make it an exponential startup and then sell it for a profit. So one possible reason is the corporate development. The other idea that I had in mind is that we know for sure that fine-grained authorization is a trend that is driven by modern development, previously by cloud native, then by the amount of data that we are providing. And now with all the hype of agent security and agent-like permissions, it is
Mm-hmm.
like the everything we knew about RBAC and access control lists and like role explosions are all things that belongs to the past. Fine-grained authorization is something you need. The question is how you will model it. You'll model it with the built-in tools like with row-level security in the database. You'll model it with engines. You'll model it with products. But at some point, every company will need that. And maybe Leonardo, they have like a large or super large portfolio of products and services that they need. And they were like, hey, if we can buy it, why we need to develop it ourselves? And they just decide instead of, do a 10 million ARR deal with AWS to buy a company for 20 or 400 or drop a number. We don't know the exact number. We don't
Yeah.
know. But
Yeah. Well,
these two reasons that make sense to me. But again, we are friends with many folks from Axiomatics. Maybe they will tell us the more insights somewhere.
I've invited Babak onto the live stream to discuss it. The deal's not closed yet, So we
Mhm.
probably won't hear a lot more until it's officially closed. I used to work in M&A in the banking sector, so so nobody can say anything right now from either of their
Right.
teams.
We
So
can.
that's why we get to speculate to our heart's desire. I asked our friend ChatGPT why, and ChatGPT had some opinions, surprisingly. And I want to run those by you, and you can just give them a thumbs up or thumbs down as if they're hallucination or not. Um, well, the one that I like that ChatGPT mentioned is that Leonardo is investing in productizing zero trust frameworks for large systems integrators. Axiomatics will likely be repositioned as the authorization layer in Leonardo's zero trust cybersecurity strategy, with pre-integrated modules for common defense security vendors, playbooks, blueprints for systems integrators, go-to-market partnerships. But what about the zero trust? Thumbs up or thumbs down on this being a zero trust play by Leonardo?
I mean, maybe in the business that Leonardo got, which kind of, they are processing things slow, especially when it comes to physical, maybe they just now adopting zero trust and they need to do it in a way that the cloud native architecture supports. So the first thing to look after is policy engine. So that might be a
Yeah,
perspective to look on.
yeah. I don't know. I do think um, um, Tom Clancy, who works at MITRE now, has given some interesting talks about zero trust, and 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 I do think zero trust is somewhat. It's easy to dismiss it as the latest jargon that doesn't matter. It's like
Mhm.
it's a trend that's not really actionable. I think people are worried about that. Um, but I do think zero trust is actionable, um, and in the authorization space, I think that it's um, it's a real concern because um, I saw it even like yesterday. We're getting feedback on a new database product, and somebody commented, "Well, the security exists in the backend application, and if the backend application is the only one accessing the database, we don't need security policies in the database." And I remember thinking that violates zero trust principles because we might have policies about the data, and you're saying that the database is supposed to trust the backend, um, and we can't do that anymore. So I wonder if ChatGPT might have a point here about integrators whom are maybe initially like on this thinking that they could get on the zero trust bandwagon by just producing marketing material, now realizing that okay, actually this isn't just a joke and we're going to have to actually really rethink our architecture and product to implement these models. So maybe ChatGPT has a point about companies, especially in the defense sector, getting serious about zero trust. So
But I mean, the other side, the other perspective of this, like getting perspective on zero trust, is that they understand that the baseline for zero trust is fine-grained authorization, and not like authenticate everywhere or continuous monitoring sessions or tokens, but have atomic fine-grained decision at every point of the chain.
yeah. Well, and re-authentication, I think there is a lot of focus on authentication, but I think authentication is the most important authorization policy there is. Um, can we trust that it's you on the other side of that? Based upon our current policies, do we have sufficient evidence um, to allow you to continue without getting more evidence of authentication? So I think authentication or stepped up authentication is the most important authorization policy there is. Um, and it's sort of related to logout. People talk about logout, and to me, logout is just an authorization problem. are you authorized to keep seeing the screen? That's what logout is. If you're not authorized to keep seeing the screen, then we're logging you out. And if we got a message from a logout message, obviously you're not authorized, but there are other reasons. But I guess back to zero trust. I think zero trust. We'll see. Was it Biden who signed the zero trust White House directive? And so when you see, sort of high level political support for these cybersecurity things, I think it's easy to dismiss them as meaningless jargon. But maybe zero trust actually has more legs than that, and we'll see. Let me go on to the next one. We should probably switch off Axiomatics for a second. Let's maybe go to the next topic. Most of these feedbacks are about Axiomatics potential synergies in the defense space, which I think is interesting.
We don't know about Axiomatics customers' portfolio, but maybe that was their 80% of the customers, and that was okay.
Yeah. I don't remember that being the case. I did talk with them about it at one time, and I remembered insurance being their strongest sector. But, defense is obviously a huge sector. And in what sector is authorization more existentially important than defense? So it's obvious.
I must say that I also see correlation between insurance and defense. That very actuaric thing, to be better in defense. So maybe
defense is a kind of insurance in a way.
It affects each other.
Well, we'll hear more. I don't know that we'll hear more. Actually, the deal will close, and then some of these large defense systems integrators are not very out there in the market. Like, we don't see them at identity conferences. So there's a chance Axiomatics disappears off the map, and we just never hear from them again. So I don't know.
I'm sure we'll hear from David, right?
Yeah. David
actually,
is a fixture. David and Babak are fixtures in the industry, so we'll hear from those guys, I'm sure. But I don't know. It's interesting news because our industry is not that big. There's a handful of companies out there, and this was the oldest company, and them getting acquired, I think, is meaningful. And I don't know how to process it because the announcement I saw from them is like, we're looking forward to our next adventure. At this, it was just very atmospherically positive, but I couldn't really figure out. There was no strategic guidance behind why this acquisition was happening. Well, let's move on to let's see. So far, our attempt at audience feedback is not succeeding, but luckily we prepared more questions. And so let's move on to the second one, which so last week I did an interview with that highlighted that MongoDB was adopting Cedar. Now, some people might say, Jim Scharf, who was a former Amazon identity and access management security leader, who was very pro Cedar, became CTO of Mongo and evaluated Mongo's authorization effort. They were internally building their own authorization engine. And I guess he made the case that they should move to Cedar. And I'm sure Mongo, being a billion-dollar public company, didn't just trust Jim, that they did a fair amount of due diligence on this, and decided that, in fact, Jim was right and that this aligned with their goals and would be strategic for them. So I thought it was a really important announcement. that could potentially be signaling to other database vendors that Cedar is a viable mechanism for fine-grained authorization. But before I get too deep into it, Gabriel, what were your thoughts on this piece of news?
Actually, when I saw the announcement, I was like, okay, now they add integration with Cedar for row level or document level security. And I was like, oh no, all my integrations with Mongo are just waste, and I need to reroute my advocacy around Mongo. But then I saw that the integration is more in the resource level, so the administrative access to Mongo Atlas, more particularly, is now can define with Cedar policies, which I think is also exciting for another perspective. And I want to put some light on the intent here. What I see, and I work a lot. I really love Mongo. I'm using Mongo since 2012. I'm consider myself as kind of an early adopter of Mongo. The reason is that I hate SQL, not because I love Mongo, but I'm a big fan of Mongo for years. And now I work with them a lot around use cases with AI and with RAG, and we just co-created some content. And I think one thing that we all see in databases is that schema is something that people not actually need or want, and it became way more flexible than what it was, especially because data is unstructured and is modeled. I mean, think of like vectors trying to attach. I know that Postgres, for example, is popular for vectors, but the Mongo way of thought of like database is something that is a persistent layer that shouldn't be persisted, like no pun intended, right? But it's something that is very dynamic. So I can see why they say it is not anymore possible to configure just RBAC on databases. This persistent layer need way more fine grain. Same as, for example, the trend that we see for people that adopting Open Policy Agent for Kubernetes or Kyverno, or more fine grained in the other infrastructure side. So
Right.
I think this
Just like to
decision
point out one thing about this. A lot of database security is connection oriented. The policies are about who connects to the database and what
correct.
role. And there's a mismatch between, or potentially a confused deputy even, between the party that's making the request for the data and the policies around who is connecting to the data. Um, and so I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I always thought database security. If one more database guy tells me, "Oh, we have security," I connected to LDAP, I'm going to scream. But I've always felt like there's
Yeah.
been this
So
mismatch.
I think more than just choosing Cedar, saying like database security, not the row level again, not the who read the data and what the connection to the data, like having
Yeah.
security on this side. I say this need fine-grained authorization is showing a trend on where database are going for. And I can clearly see the value of companies choosing Mongo because like I know like this term of Hannah Hershey from GitLab, that she said like permissions or auth or access control is a revenue driven feature. And I can clearly see how, with Mongo, with any kind of database, okay, just put the password and connect to the DB, and then maybe configure RBAC that will allow people to drop on, etc. But they say no, like we are out of box allowing you to connect to Cedar, allowing you to connect to fine-grained permissions. That could be great also for people to choose Mongo on top of other DBs. And to be honest, like the competition today in the world of databases is crazy. Like every day you find a new database for a very specific thing. And in the enterprise could be even more, can be even more hard to compete. So I really think these fine-grained permissions could be revenue driven one for Mongo. And I mean that beside of the signal that infrastructure need fine-grained authorization, and that a company that is large and built into the market has so much investment on
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It seems to me like the database world security policies are really complicated because um, one of the features of Cedar is automated reasoning, that you can prove that something that was true is still true. And when it comes to data security, if you have some type of upgrade and you have permissions around data, and you then change these positions, to something new, your new application, your upgrade, how do you know that your data security hasn't changed? So it seems like the potential for um, um, remember, data feeds the AI. So your potential for risk around misconfigurations in database security is really significant. And something like Cedar, if they could apply more automated reasoning um, techniques to it, could give you more assurance that the security hasn't changed in a way that would break something that you thought was previously true. Like, we're never sharing this kind of data. That was true before the upgrade, but after the upgrade, maybe it's not true anymore. So I like the vision. I think Amazon has a more enlightened vision about formal reasoning and its potential analytic opportunities, but I'm not sure that the tooling exists to actually take advantage of this. And I'm curious. When I saw that demo, what I noticed is that they had an input box, and I don't know, they must have been playing a video, because nobody could type in Cedar policies as fast as they did on that video, especially a complicated Cedar policy like the one that they showed. But I'm just wondering, as somebody who Permit also has a Cedar product, so we consider you guys on the Cedar bandwagon to a certain extent. What are your thoughts about the challenges, the promise of Cedar versus the difficulty of authoring policies, and the difficulty of taking advantage of some of these potentially powerful analytic tools versus the reality of where we are today? And what does MongoDB's adoption say about that?
I love this question because so first, when people tell me that Cedar is hard to author, I tell them, hey, let's check out Zacmel and Rigo and then understand what is a hard language. To be honest, in my opinion, Cedar is one of the easiest and most intuitive languages, like policy languages, to write. And because it has formal typing and strong type, you can really get help from agents and completions, like to be said, but also coding agents to generate you the policies and create them. So I think like the reason, actually, the actual reason we added Cedar is to allow people to support policy as code, because the main policy at Permit is built on top of Rigo, and everyone that look at Rigo, they say, I don't want to learn a new language. I don't want to learn a new language that doesn't look like any language that I'm using, but look like Prolog. So we tried to find a way to allow people to write policies and not actually create them via our APIs, and Cedar will look like an option that makes sense. And then we also published the Cedar agent, which is a container that you can make like Cedar PDP in some sense. And we see adoption of Cedar, and to the most surprising stuff, we see adoption in Cedar for like more infrastructure than, as you can think, like people will adopt Cedar for AVP and we'll get to AVP soon, but people will adopt Cedar for AVP and application authorization. But where we see people adopting Cedar is actually when they need to allow to delegate permissions to other people to config and to author them, exactly like what we see in Mongo. So Mongo come and say, hey, we are using Cedar, now configure policies. So we see some companies that say, okay, from now on, all the policies in the company are written in Cedar, and we can support Cedar anywhere, and we'll also support for our customers using AVP. So I think the complexity of Cedar is one of the simplest one. I think on the other end of the story, Cedar has a contextual problem because Cedar does not have a way to consist data of any time. So there is no consistency built in Cedar. You need to do read your writes. You need to pass your data together or load it in advance. But then because it has this formal evaluation, you can't do relationships like what you do in more Google Zanzibar driven models. So it's really hard to just migrate your good wish for organizational, hierarchical, graph-based policies into
Hmm.
Cedar. It is more fit to administrative that can build on top of attributes and on top of data that is kind of flat. And
Hmm.
I mean, it has two sides. The first side is that the good side is about the proof and it probably the fastest policy engine out there, and the downside is about handling data. So usually organizations that has a very specific organizational need or originating or and stuff like that, they would not go with Cedar, will go more with Zanzibar or OPA or OpenFGA. But yeah, we see this. This is the place where we see Cedar adopted the most. Let allow our users to configure policies, and then even maybe we can combine it with more traditional engines because Cedar decisions takes nothing.
I wanted to show, okay, Davel is going to be a guest pretty soon. He's our community manager at Janssen Project. Hey, Davel. But he makes a good point here that I think you were making, Gabriel.
Yeah.
He said, I think we should call it database security instead of data security in Mongo's case.
Hmm.
I think based upon what Gabriel said, I think that's exactly spot on. And database security is really tough. Like who can create an index? Who can drop a table? Who can create a database? Like these are, database administration and the roles around that are quite complex. I kind of feel like if they're getting into, don't you think? I think it's kind of natural for them to move into the data security part once they've dipped their toe into database. Um, so I think we'll see if
that
that's.
that will be that will be the real game changer when Mongo will support Cedar for document level. First, it will be the database by definition with the best policies you can get, because again, if you ever saw the way you do row level security in either way, Cedar is way more makes sense than that. It will need some adoption, but I mean, I really wait for this time where Cedar will support it as a first
Yeah.
class citizen for data security.
I'm reflecting a little bit on what you were saying about Cedar, the challenge around Cedar being the data. OPA has a data API where you can send data into it, um, and so Cedar, um, I think works better. In Janssen project, we tend to assume that the input to Cedar policies are JWTs, which are they're so static they're signed.
Yeah.
um, and so we have provenance of that data, not only the data, and also the schema is very formalized in a JWT. Um,
Mhm.
so so it's natural for us to do a mapping from the JWT schema to the to Cedar schema, and we can parse also the data inside of a JWT and map that to Cedar schema. For example, a URI. Well, a URI has a host and a path and arguments, and we can and we might want to break that apart and make policy on it. Um, but Cedar assumes you're bringing your own data with it. I think Gabriel's right about this: is that you have your data and you're evaluating your policies on it. Um, and Cedar is the only language that really formalize or schema validation as a requirement for processing. Rego has no such requirement, and relational systems like Zanzibar generally don't even require you, or the entities don't have attributes. we're defining relationships between entities. Those entities don't
there
necessarily
is
evaluate.
there is concept of conditions now in OpenFGA and also in SpiceDB, but it's not part of the Zanzibar, and it works probably way slower than any kind of Cedar like implementation.
Yeah, I don't see these things as mutually exclusive. Graphs are particularly useful for doing certain types of analysis.
Mhm.
And so I don't necessarily see these things as mutually exclusive. I think graph-based databases is going to be really good at securing certain types of resources, especially cloud, with complex relationships and hierarchies. Just like we had LDAP databases, and we have other hierarchical, even JSON databases to a certain extent are hierarchical versus SQL, which tends to be more flat, but both are useful. Um, but pivoting back to MongoDB a little bit, um, and I guess my question is do you think that this is the start of a trend that MongoDB is one of the best funded database companies out there? A lot of data, you mentioned how competitive the database market is, and a lot of database companies have floundered. Just look at MariaDB, right?
Yeah.
That was like, there's been a whole bunch. Even Couchbase that you mentioned to a certain extent has really floundered. I'm sure they're off their high valuations. Um, so MongoDB, it's not just a database company, it's one of the most successful database companies
Yeah.
out there. One of the ones that really figured out how to get cloud working from them. A lot of database companies introduced cloud offerings that didn't quite take on, but Atlas and in general, Mongo has really ridden cloud in a way that I think a lot of other databases haven't. So I guess my question is do you think that this is the start of a trend and we might start to see other databases adopting MongoDB for either database security or document security? And if so, do you have any predictions for which ones might be next?
It is a good question because to run Cedar, you need some effort. I mean, it is not that easy to run Cedar, and you need to do some effort for that. So maybe for some other, they will might be able to just drop on base better kind of RBAC or stuff like that. Um, prediction is a good question because there are like companies like Oracle or I don't know. I mean, the only company that I can think of, maybe I'm totally wrong in the business size, but I can like compare to Mongo, just acquired by IBM, which is DataStax. That
Hmm.
been like, they did it with Cassandra and they dropped like business I heard about in the 100 millions to billion ARR, so tons of money, right? Built on top of one database, but I didn't have any kind of a cloud play there. Most of their money was from on-prem licenses. So Mongo is kind of, from the business perspective and from the cloud perspective, is kind of unique company in the space in the way they lead. And I can't say if this like, okay, we have the privilege to work on experiment that call authorization and spend time on it because we are like, we don't care about spending our time, while others need to focus in like must have features, or that other analysts will take a look at the market and will say Mongo did it for a reason. Mongo did it because it's going to bring the money, and then we'll see like a chase or a race after who will get the best fine-grained authorization of them. I'll say that again, the thing that would most maybe that is really interesting me is the first database that company or the database product that will drop off a data fine-grained permissions, even something that kind of connects to some internal graph. Because what we see today with vector DBs is like databases said, okay, you have the database, continue to work with Mongo with the way you do, but add a layer on top of it of vector, right? Now,
Yeah.
fine-grained authorization is not that a critical like having vector for AI agents. I wish so, but people are still not understanding that. But maybe when we'll see a company that say, hey, same like you have vector layer, now you have graph layer for permissions. And now start model all your relationship, or maybe even use the internal relationship to traverse this graph and understand permissions in the document level security. So I think it is a good signal, but I don't have any kind of prediction on how other companies will see and adopt that.
I have a prediction.
Yeah,
FerretDB.
what?
FerretDB is it's a MongoDB open source alternative. And I had the
Like
founder of FerretDB on my open source live stream. So I'm going to call him up and say, hey, MongoDB is doing this. Maybe you should. Let's so we have time for one more topic, and I want to. This is kind of a fascinating one, but Amazon announced that they're dropping the price of AVP by 97%. Now, cloud companies are known for incrementally reducing costs as they achieve economies of scale. That's one of the cool things about cloud, is that sometimes the price goes down. Normally it's expensive and you pay more, but occasionally prices go down. But 97%, that's not a prices going down because we're getting scales. To me, that's a signal, is like we completely got pricing wrong on the first go and we're having another go at it. So I'm curious, what your take, what should we read into this? Because 97% is not something that can be swept under the carpet. What's your take on why Amazon felt it was necessary to drop? And I'll give you ChatGPT's takes later if you want to.
Yeah, so I'll say that I have some experience with authorization pricing because I built permit pricing from scratch, like rebuilt permit pricing for scratch.
And you got it right the first time, right?
What?
And you got it right the first time, right? You just
no. I
nailed
mean,
it?
this is what I correct myself. I didn't build the permit pricing. I rebuilt the permit pricing a couple of months ago. And I'll say that permit is is different than AVP because we are charging per monthly active user and not or monthly active subject to some extent, but not by authorization decision. AVP and many other charge per authorization decision. Now, charging per authorization decision with Cedar is tricky because Cedar decision from the computing perspective does not cost much because it is super efficient and it's not like, I mean, for like most of the decision, I mean, you can build on top on that people will try to have the decision the most efficient they can, so they would not create the decision that take 1 second to run and cost you tons of computing.
And by the way, we're doing 50 microsecond decisions in Cedar in a browser, not on like on a tray, but on a in the browser.
Exactly. So think of like making authorization decision in AVP. The API gateway cost is even more expensive than the authorization decision cost. So if you ask me, it's like now it's I don't know what was the previous price, but it's like 97%. So maybe the previous like maybe 10. I don't understand either the price before or now, because what I know, when you're thinking of authorization, you made way more calculation than how much one decision will cost me. But AWS is probably bigger than ours. And when they think of pricing, they put two things that we are not thinking of when we do pricing. The first one, they say, okay, we want to adopt that. So we want people to adopt that. So we just charge something they will feel it's a premium service, but we'll lose money on that to make people adopting AVP.
That was ChatGPT's number one land grab strategy to dominate the authorization market. That's the number one.
Right. So this is a factor that non-player can take on when try to do authorization. That's the first thing. The
Let me just
second,
have feedback on this a little bit. This land grab, I'm not sure there's a lot of land to grab. Like if we're talking about the database market, that's a massive market with a massive amount of land. But I'm not sure that companies actually spend anything on authorization. So there's not a lot to grab onto there.
well, they spent, I know because that paid my salary, but companies spend money on authorization. The
But
thing
Permit's a
is,
little company. It's not Amazon.
not Amazon, correct. I, I think, well, I mean, I've been involved with Cedar from the day one, and the question that every person that made Cedar ask, what is the difference between IEM to AVP? So they
Hmm.
try to do something to create. I mean, every Amazon product that I see, I'm thinking of, like, from the business perspective, I'm thinking of two things, or maybe on one thing. I think like every AWS intent, revenue intent, is to create stickiness. They don't care about this startup that pay 4K a month. They care about this huge, like, a contract. I mean, you know how it's Amazon works, right? You put your pro rata invoice, and then at the end of the year, you're looking for services in the marketplace to spend money on, so because you left some money in your AWS budget. That's the way AWS bills work on large companies. So when AWS trying to push something, they hope they will make people more stick to be on the whole AWS stack.
Mm. Get
And
more
I
of that
think,
budget that was already allocated for AWS.
yeah, they don't, I mean, they don't really think of people need authorization. They think if people do authorization at AWS, then they will stick more with AWS, with API gateway or whatever it is, like, that helps them to stick with it. They want to keep the whole stack AWS. And they thought about, there is a trend on, and when they drop the price, for me, there is nothing like too serious about it. They have like this analyst that say, you think if we'll drop the price, we'll get growth of 100% in the next year. So they drop the price. They don't care about, like, not the previous price, not the next price. It's just, it's like, it was a very simple prediction trending decision that made this pricing manager to say, let's drop it. It's not like, okay, let's think of how we'll develop growth and how we'll calculate our computing pricing and how we'll, when we do pricing at Permi, there are so many factors that we are manually and humanly put in because that was the growth engine of our company. But I think this analyst or marketing guy or go-to-market guy that decided, or person that decided to do the price drop, is nothing but some spreadsheet that shows that if you'll drop it, you'll get growth in
Mm.
adoption in X amount. So let's drop it. I don't think there is like too strategic decision behind it.
Yeah. ChatGPT had a number of, their number two was defensive move against competitors. By pricing AVP extremely cheaply, AWS may be undercutting other vendors trying to commercialize Cedar-based PDPs. I don't think they give a crap about that. I think that the competition's not on their radar. I think it's I don't know. Maybe I'm
Look,
naive.
like $5 for million is like definitely the cheapest you can find in the market.
If there were other viable competitors out there, then I think that might be true. I don't think they see the embryonic companies that are Permit and Glue as serious competitors for Cedar. So I don't know. I have a hard time seeing that this is anti-competitive. Um, and then they say increase AWS overall lock-in. That aligns a little bit with what you were saying. Saying, yes, we have this much Amazon budget. We're going to give you more ways to spend. And actually, security is a differentiator and can cause stickiness. So if you build, let's say, it's not just that you're using compute, but you're using our policies to secure your compute and persistence, that could cause stickiness. So that one I
Mhm.
think is true. I give ChatGPT +1 on that. Antitrust preemption? I don't know. Technical confidence in the ecosystem growth. I think that, this one I'll say, I think that I'm going to relate this to something that probably Amazon would call a non sequitur, but I think they're related. Recently, the Cedar team announced that they're contributing Cedar to the CNCF. And I think if you look at these two things together, dropping the price, reducing the barriers to adoption in this in a monetary sense, but also in improving the governance structure of Cedar to show that Cedar is not just an Amazon thing, but it's actually an important invention that we're going to open up the governance to a community governance model and incubate with a larger community. So I think you can look at these two things together, dropping the price and contributing to CNCF, as signs that maybe Amazon isn't getting the type of adoption that they want of Cedar, despite their massive investment in the superstars of formal reasoning and getting all these talented engineers to build this thing. That Cedar has been sort of like a yawn. Like, oh yeah, Amazon has an authorization thing, but we don't want to get any more locked into Amazon. And Microsoft and Google will come out with their own authorization thing. So I think that maybe the reception of Cedar has been less than they expected, given the probably the merits of its technical merits and the amount of work that went into it. And they're pulling out all stops to figure out how to reverse this course and put Cedar on a positive trajectory for adoption by making the hosted service cheaper and also by doubling down on the open source strategy and trying to pull in the community. So, okay, we're not going to have a chance to get to the last topic, which is the Authlete embedding Cedar in a JWT. We'll have to leave that one to next time. I've actually I tried to get Taka Kawasaki from Authlete on the live stream, but he says it's too early. This is still really early that he's working on this idea. But I'm excited about that particular announcement because people were talking about it at the last IAW in Mountain View. I don't think it's the main use case for Cedar, but I think that there's some interesting use cases around how do you convey obligations that need to be passed after access decisions have been made. Like, let's say I have a photo and I give you this photo and I say, you have access to the photo, but you don't have the right to distribute this photo in Russia. I never want this photo being seen in Russia. So sometimes the decisions aren't just simply, can you access or not? But there are residual obligations or restrictions. You must display a photo credit, and you can't display this in Russia. And somehow capturing those policies and passing them along with the asset has some interesting implications, although I think it's kind of niche. I said we weren't going to do it, but you know what? I realized we actually have a couple of minutes here because we scheduled this one longer. Oh, wait, there's a question. Paul's got a question.
Another comment.
Okay, we said we're going to do questions priority, so here it is. Davel says, does GCP and Azure have better and cheaper services than AVP? I don't think they have anything in this area.
No, they don't have anything. Entra has some policies, but not fine-grained as Cedar. And it's a kind of unique service for AWS.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. Does Permit have an authorization as a service? Just that's similar to AVP, you would say?
You asked about Permit?
Yeah. Does Permit have would you say that Permit has an authorization as a service that's competitive with AVP?
Kind of competitive with AVP. We have way more kind of features and integration points and SDKs and etc. So
Yeah.
not only AVP plain running Cedar policies, but yes,
It seems
the
Permit seems
competition.
more governance oriented. It's not just about authorization as a service, but about managing people and getting logs and more
Also authorization.
enterprising. Yeah.
Yes.
No, this
We
is a
are
very unique service.
our main goal is kind of AI plus customer identity, but
Mhm.
you can do authorization for it.
Rohit Kar had a comment after our live stream last week where he called AVP the geekiest product of Amazon has ever released, and he said it's almost like googly, and
Can't
it's like
agree more.
its desire to take computer science theory and make it into a product, and so I don't see authorization as a service. I guess, Cerbos, I think, has something that's maybe kind of similar. Um, maybe
Yeah, we do
permit.
have
I think
similar
yours is more
server.
enterprise oriented. Yeah,
We do have also for something that is similar to Cerbos. It depends on how do you look in it. This market is creating now, right? It's evolving as we speak. So it is hard to say what is the exact product. Permit has all the functionality that, for sure, the functionality that AVP provide, and way more than
yeah,
that. And we are focusing again in developers who need to develop authorization.
yeah. But so definitely not in the big platforms, though.
Mm-hmm.
Azure and GCP. Um,
No.
and we don't see that they have big formal reasoning teams either. So it doesn't seem likely that you'll see something like Cedar come out of. I'm sure in a best case scenario, see if Cedar is accepted as an incubating project at CNCF, um, then I think Amazon's dream is to get alignment with Microsoft and Google and others on Cedar. Um, but I think that would have to be long term. Um, so
Mm-hmm.
anyway, good question, Dhaval. Um, well, I think that brings us to the end. We were talking a little bit at the end about JWT. Hopefully, I can convince Taka to come on the live stream when he's ready at some point to talk about embedded Cedar. Gabriel, let me give you last thoughts. Any last thoughts on any of these topics?
Yeah, I think I think the thing that's really exciting me is about adoption of fine-grained authorization, especially in MongoDB, but it's like everywhere, and we do a lot of work, as said, around the agentic now permissions. And good luck for the Axiomatics folks, and I hope to hear the reason. And always good to chat with you, Mike.
Okay, yeah, I want to second that. Best of luck to the Axiomatics team, who we love. We've loved working with you guys, and we hope to continue to work with you guys, and that it doesn't get buried inside some huge defense systems integrator, and you continue to collaborate with the community. Axiomatics has been one of the great leaders and thought leaders, so it's been a pleasure, and we hope that continues. And well, agentic AI and authorization, that needs like 15 more episodes. So no way we're getting to that one. If you throw a rock, you hit 10 MCP vendors in agentic AI, all claiming to have a solution. Maybe we'll even have one on agent.security. One of the best TLDs or domain names I've ever heard. This is if you want to read about permits approach to agent security, I saw some type of proxy secured by a permit PDP in there. So agent.security, check that out. But yeah, maybe I foresee a lot of 2026 episodes on this topic, and probably even some more in 2025. So thank you, Gabriel, for joining us in this very last minute informal, probably the most informal. I can put on my hat again because I'm going to do my official duties and announce the next episode. Next episode is going to be with Dr. Daniel Fett, who is one of the gurus in decentralized identity, and we're talking about W3C's credential API, which is one of my favorite topics. We also had Sam Goto from Google on about 50 episodes ago. But anyway, this is a really interesting topic. Daniel is a guru, so I hope you can join us next Thursday. And with that, I will say thank you, audience, and thank you, Gabriel, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much.